I learned very young that love in my family came with conditions. It wasn't spoken out loud, not at first. It lived in the pauses after I spoke, in the tight smiles my parents wore when teachers praised me for being too ambitious, in the way my dreams were treated like bad habits that needed correcting. I was expected to follow a narrow path, safe, predictable, respectable. Anything beyond that made them uncomfortable. I was 19 when I realized I would never be the daughter they wanted. My mother liked daughters who obeyed quietly, who wore sensible clothes and made sensible choices. My father valued results he could explain to his friends. I was neither quiet nor sensible. I stayed up late teaching myself how systems worked, how code talked to machines, how ideas could become something real. While other girls my age were encouraged to explore who they were, I was reminded constantly of who I should be. "Don't get carried away," my father would say whenever I spoke with excitement. "People like us don't take risks," my mother added gently, as if she were protecting me. But what she was really protecting was their image. I built my first prototype on a second-hand laptop with a cracked screen. I hid it like a secret diary, closing the tabs whenever footsteps approached my bedroom door. When it finally worked, when I saw real users respond to something I created, I felt something bloom in my chest that I'd never felt before. Pride. I told my parents anyway. I wanted them to see me. They didn't. My mother laughed softly, the way people laugh at children pretending to be adults. My father frowned like I'd admitted to something embarrassing. "This isn't a real career," he said. "You're wasting time." From that moment on, every failure, even imagined ones, was mine alone. Every success was either luck or something they could claim later. When mentors praised me, my parents dismissed them. When opportunities came, they warned me I wasn't ready. Yet everything changed when money entered the conversation. When investors called. When articles mentioned my name. When numbers became impressive enough to brag about. Suddenly my mother told relatives how supportive she had always been. Suddenly my father wanted to help manage things. They spoke to me with pride in public and doubt in private, reminding me who paid the bills, who had experience, who knew better. I wanted their approval so badly that I ignored the unease tightening in my stomach. I told myself this was what family did, guided, protected, sacrificed. What I didn't understand then was that they weren't ashamed of my failures. They were ashamed of my independence. Of a daughter who didn't need permission. Of a young woman who was becoming something they couldn't control. And the more I grew, the more they resented me for it. By the time I realized their love came with strings attached, I was already tangled in them. And I had no idea how sharp those strings could be, until they tightened around my future. Trust is a quiet thing. It doesn't announce itself. It settles in slowly, built from years of believing that the people who raised you would never intentionally harm you. That was the trust my parents used against me. They didn't rush it. They waited until I was exhausted, running on coffee, deadlines, and the pressure of being the youngest person in every serious meeting. That's when they stepped in, calm and reassuring, like rescuers. "You're overwhelmed," my mother said, rubbing my back one evening. "Let us help," my father added. "Just until things stabilize." They brought folders. Lawyers. Words I half understood and fully ignored. They spoke in a language that sounded responsible: liability, protection, restructuring. When I hesitated, they smiled patiently, as if I were the child again. "Do you really think we'd ever hurt you?" my mother asked. I signed. I still remember the pen shaking in my hand, a small part of me screaming that something was wrong. But I swallowed it. Because daughters who question their parents are labeled difficult, ungrateful, disloyal. Within weeks, everything unraveled. My access to the company systems was suddenly under review. Meetings happened without me. My name disappeared from internal emails. When I asked questions, I was told to rest, to trust the process, to stop being emotional. Then one morning, my keycard didn't work. I stood in the lobby of the office I had built from nothing, watching security avoid my eyes. When I called my father, his voice was distant, professional. "This is for the best," he said. "You were becoming unstable." Unstable. The word cut deeper than any accusation. I went home shaking, my chest tight, my mind racing. That night, my mother cried at the kitchen table, not for me, but for herself. "We sacrificed so much for you," she sobbed. "And this is how you repay us?" By the end of the month, the betrayal was complete. They didn't just take control. They erased me. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, thick and impersonal. Mismanagement. Financial recklessness. Emotional incompetence. According to the documents, I wasn't the creator, I was the problem. I stared at the pages until the words blurred. I expected anger. Screaming. Tears. Instead, something inside me went quiet. I stopped calling them. I stopped explaining. I stopped trying to prove I was worthy of being believed. For the first time, I saw the truth clearly. They hadn't helped me because they loved me. They helped me because they wanted what I built. And they assumed I was weak enough to let them keep it. That was their mistake. Because while they were busy celebrating their victory, signing their names where mine used to be, they never noticed what I hadn't handed over. They never asked why I was so calm. Why I stopped fighting. I wasn't giving up. I was learning. And betrayal, I discovered, is a brutal teacher, but a very effective one. From that moment on, I stopped being their daughter. I became their reckoning. The courtroom smelled like old wood and quiet judgment. I sat at the defense table with my hands folded neatly in my lap, spine straight, expression neutral. On the surface, I looked composed. Inside, memories rattled like loose glass, late nights, whispered doubts, signatures I wished I could tear from the past. Across the room, my parents sat side by side, close enough to look united, rehearsed in their grief. They had dressed for sympathy. My mother wore soft colors, her hair pulled back like a woman worn down by disappointment. My father's suit was conservative, respectable, the kind of man judges trusted instinctively. They didn't look at me. Not once. When my mother took the stand, she collapsed into tears with practiced precision. "We gave her every opportunity," she sobbed, clutching a tissue. "Education. Support. Money. And she threw it all away chasing fantasies." My father nodded gravely beside her, as if each word wounded him. I watched the performance in silence, something heavy pressing behind my ribs. These were the same people who once scolded me for crying too loudly, for being dramatic. Now drama was their weapon. They painted me as unstable, reckless, ungrateful. A young woman who didn't know her place. Their attorney spoke about sacrifice. About how parents sometimes had to make difficult decisions to protect what a child was destroying. Heads nodded in the gallery. I felt the familiar burn of being misunderstood, of watching others decide who I was without ever asking me. My lawyer remained calm. Barely spoke. Took notes. That scared them more than anger ever could. The judge flipped through the case file, his expression unreadable. Page after page turned. The room hummed with quiet confidence from my parents' side. They believed they had won before it began. Then the sound stopped. The judge's fingers froze mid-page. He frowned, leaned closer, then looked up slowly. "Wait," he said. Every breath in the room seemed to pause. "I read about this company in Forbes last week," he continued. "The product. The growth curve. The founder's story." My mother's face drained of color. The judge adjusted his glasses. "But the leadership listed in that article doesn't match what I'm seeing here." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. He looked directly at my parents. "According to this case, you claim full ownership and original control." Then he turned to me. "And yet, the company I read about is registered under a different structure entirely." Silence. The judge closed the file with deliberate care. "Someone here," he said calmly, "is lying to my face." For the first time, my parents looked at me. Not with anger. Not with pity. With fear. Because in that moment, the story they had so carefully constructed began to crack. The narrative of the broken daughter no longer fit. And the truth, long buried under signatures and manipulation, was finally pressing its way to the surface. I met their gaze steadily. And I waited. Because lies can survive many things, but they rarely survive daylight. The silence after the judge's words felt heavier than any accusation. I rose slowly from my seat, the sound of the chair leg scraping softly against the floor echoing through the courtroom. My parents' lawyer opened his mouth to object, then hesitated. The judge raised a hand, granting me permission to speak. For the record, I said, my voice steady, the company my parents claim I destroyed was never the real one. A ripple of shock moved through the room. I turned slightly, just enough to face the gallery, but my eyes stayed on the bench. What they took control of was a shell, an administrative structure designed to hold meetings and impress investors. The technology, the intellectual property, and the international registrations were transferred months earlier. My mother let out a small, broken sound. I continued, calm as I had rehearsed 100 times in my head. I learned early that trust without verification is dangerous. So while they were asking me to sign documents, I was quietly protecting what I built. The judge leaned forward, interest sharpening his expression. My parents assumed I was too young, too emotional, too dependent to understand what was happening, I said. They were wrong. My lawyer finally stood, submitting evidence, timestamps, registrations, correspondence. Every document told the same story. The real company, profitable, expanding, internationally recognized, belonged solely to me. The judge reviewed the materials carefully. Then, with a firm strike of his gavel, the case was dismissed. Not postponed. Not delayed. Dismissed. The courtroom erupted, whispers, gasps, the rustle of disbelief. My parents sat frozen, the masks they had worn for months crumbling in seconds. They didn't look powerful anymore. They looked exposed. But the true revenge didn't end there. News travels fast when betrayal involves money and family. The story spread, how two executives tried to seize their daughter's work, how they misrepresented ownership in court, how greed blinded them. Investors withdrew. Partnerships dissolved. Invitations stopped coming. Their carefully built reputation collapsed under the weight of the truth. As for me, I walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon light, feeling something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Relief. Not triumph. Not cruelty. Freedom. I didn't turn back when I heard my mother call my name. I didn't need closure from the people who taught me that love could be transactional. I had already given them more than they deserved. The sweetest revenge wasn't watching them fall. It was realizing I no longer needed their approval to stand tall. I had built something once in secret, driven by fear of disappointing them. Now I would build openly, without fear, without apology. They lost the case. They lost the company. But most of all, they lost the daughter they believed they owned. And I gained myself.